Awesome. Thank you, Chaz. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we'll be talking about how to scale a drone program across your construction company, from relying on one pilot to building a company-wide standardized mapping program. This is something that we see all the time over at Datumate. Teams usually start strong, but scaling is where things can sometimes get difficult. So today, we're going to break down what works, what doesn't, and how to actually get there. Really happy to have you all joining us today. Before we jump in, just a few introductions. I'm Chelsea Cornute. I'm the North America Customer Success Manager at Datumate. I'm joined by Dallas Van Zanten, our Solutions Engineer. Dallas, you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yes, thanks, Chelsea. My name is Dallas Van Zanten, Solutions Engineer at Datumate. A little bit about me. My background's in heavy civil construction, and I've also been flying drones commercially for about 12 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Dallas. Happy to have you here. We're also joined today by Chris Fudge from Weber. Chris, we're super happy to have you here as well. Thanks so much for your time. Chris works closely with his teams on implementing drone workflows in active construction environments, and he's developed some really strong best practices around flight consistency and how to scale these programs in the field. Again, very excited to have him here to share some real world perspective alongside what we're covering today. How you doing, Chris?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, folks, to give you a quick sense of what we'll cover today, we're going to start with how most drone programs usually get started and where they tend to break down. Then we'll walk through what we've seen work when teams scale, highlight some of the common mistakes and best practices along the way, and wrap up with what a mature, fully scaled program looks like. We'll also keep this interactive with a few polls throughout and leave the time at the end for Q&A. Thanks in advance to Chaz Ross Monroe, our head of marketing, for helping with the polls. All right, before we dive into our first session, I'm really curious where everyone is today. How would you describe your organization's drone program? You should see a pop-up shortly on your screen. Just select the option that best fits. Maybe we'll give it just about 10 seconds.
Okay, I've got a couple of responses, a few more trickling in. Put a few more, don't be shy. No one can see what you're putting in. All right, looks like we've got some answers, so I'll go ahead and end the poll. And I'm going to share so everybody can see where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you all for your input. Really appreciate it. Pretty typical mix of where teams tend to be. Looks like we have, not actually a ton of teams in that early to mid stage. That's usually where programs start to hit some challenges. So I'm interested to hear from the group on some further polls on, the future states that we see in some of the responses here. Regardless of where you are today, most programs usually start in a very similar way. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that typically looks like together. So this is how we see most programs begin. Dallas, I was wondering if you could walk through what this stage typically looks like.
Yeah, so normally it will start with one pilot or maybe someone that's into drones, and they try to, um, you know, get drones implemented into the company that they're working with, which is great. But normally, because of that, there's no really standard operating procedures, and because it's normally one person that's trying to get things going, maybe different drones or hardware are being used on different projects. Therefore, everything is like decentralized. Like for an example, maybe all the data lives on the SD card of the drone or on that individual's computer. Therefore, everyone cannot access it. And then also another thing is just like inconsistent results. Therefore, like it's hard for people internally, whether it's like your estimating team, your project management team, or your survey team to actually trust the data.
Insight, definitely. Thanks, Dallas. Um, Before we get into actually how to scale that from where we were, we'd love to hear from the group again. What tends to be the biggest challenge with your drone data today?
All right, people are still putting in their answers. Don't be shy, guys. Okay, a couple people put in their responses. We got a couple more. There we go. All right, I'm going to lock it down and share the results.
To see. Okay, yeah, that's super helpful. Honestly, lines up really closely with what we hear daily. Um, inconsistent accuracy, training new pilots, processing time. A lot of people curious about managing large data sets. So, very interesting. And thank you all so much for your input. What we're going to walk through next actually outlines the core pieces that we see successful teams put in place to solve exactly those challenges. So, you all are in the right spot today. At a high level, these four pillars are what scaling actually comes down to. We will dive into them a bit in more detail. But Dallas, before we do, I was wondering if you could speak to some of these a little bit.
Yeah. So for the first pillar, standardizing data capture, we'll get into more of the details, but essentially you just want to make sure that if you're flying a site, on a regular cadence, that you're using standard data capture settings like overlap, altitude that meet your accuracy requirements. The next is equipment. Obviously, you want to make sure you're choosing the right hardware, the right drone for the right project, whether it's a multi-rotor, or a fixed wing or a VTOL, or maybe you need LiDAR for vegetation purposes or to get better accuracy. And then pillar three, which I think is really important, is training. I think it's really important, not just the Part 107 training, but constant training throughout a drone pilot's career. Just keeping up on hardware, keeping up on new software. But then also like all these drones have their own little tweaks and different settings and operate differently. On top of that, depending on what you're capturing as well, whether if it's maybe a linear highway project, horizontal construction, data capture is going to be different than doing a large rectangle. And then data processing and quality control, I think, is really important. You want to make sure that when you're collecting data, that it's accurate before you pass on whatever deliverable you're required to give. That way, you build confidence in the data in your team and what you're delivering to them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dallas. That's really helpful overview of what we're going to cover today. Before we jump into pillar number one, just one more poll for you guys. Don't be shy. We're going to talk about standardization first. Do your pilots currently fly with the same settings across your projects?
All right, we've got a couple answers. We've got some people that have some good documentation processes in place.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and share the results.
People with documented SOPs in place. That's fantastic news, group. For the ones that, mostly or everyone does their own thing or we don't have multiple pilots, totally fine as well. Let's talk about some recommendations to make sure your data is captured consistently in the field. Chris, I'd love to start with you here, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear what you've seen work when it comes to data capture across multiple projects.
So we try to float that line between quality and quality, quantity and quality. What we found is, an altitude of around 200 feet is ideal. We do adjust altitude for obstacles or time. Overlap, same thing. 75 is usually a good standard. Camera settings, 1,000 frame, shutter speed, automatic settings pretty much work standard. Lighting conditions, a lot of times cloudier weather makes better orthos. But when you're weather dependent, you fly when you can. And then GCPs are very important, especially for survey grade accuracies. We found 800 to 1200 feet works pretty good. But you can get better by tightening your grid.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. Appreciate it. Dallas, anything you'd like to add from what you're seeing across teams that work with DataBIM today?
Yeah, I think 200 feet is great for a 20 megapixel camera. And obviously, if you have a different drone that has like a 40 or 60 megapixel camera, you can definitely fly a little higher. Hey, Chris, I'm curious, are you flying with RTK pretty much on all of your projects?
Yes, we normally run an in-trip RTK network.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, with RTK, obviously you can get away with less GCPs. Without RTK, you're gonna want more.
That's cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. So once the data capture piece is consistent, once you've gone through and dialed in your settings on the drone, the next question becomes, are we actually using the right hardware for the job? Chris, how should teams be thinking about equipment as they start to scale across different types of projects?
I mean, the first one is probably what you're using it for. If you're just taking job site photographs for documentation, first tier camera drone. Tier two, you start moving into photogrammetry. Tier three, then you can start moving into LiDAR, heavy lift, more of your, geospatial type situations.
It really comes down, it sounds like, to aligning the tool with a level of accuracy or output you actually need for the job. Makes a lot of sense. I'd love, this is a bit of a hot topic. I thought it'd be great for both of you guys to share your insight on the federal regulations. Chris, we've spoken quite a bit on sort of Weber's process that you've been going about. I'd love to, if you don't mind sharing with the group what the process has looked like, how it's gone for you. Dallas as well, I'd love for this to, share some thoughts around it. I think I'm sure some of the people in our webinar today are feeling the same pains and looking for some guidance too.
Yeah, so with the federal regulations that rolled down in December, we're having to change our fleets, as are a lot of DOTs and contractors. We are currently testing NDAA blue list compliant aircraft. Our current aircraft we're testing is the Freefly Astro. It is a larger, heavier lift aircraft, higher megapixel camera, which allows for higher flight altitudes and shorter flight times. So we've been testing. We've struggled with new platform, as would any platform change. But that's where we're at. We're looking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know you guys have done quite a bit of testing before getting to the point you are now with, flying sites live. And, I'm curious, Chris, what the step might look like for training your pilots on the new equipment too, whenever you get to that point. What is Weber's plan for that?
Well, we're having to rewrite our entire training program. Aircraft are larger, more complicated, sometimes less user friendly when you're used to your standard drone manufacturers. So, we will increase our training time and proficiency on flight and running missions because of these new platforms.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it, Chris. Dallas, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would like to add is, making sure you choose the right tool for the right job. I always say like look at the drone as like another tool in your toolbox. So you want to make sure that you're using the right one. Obviously, for smaller areas, you can get away with a quadcopter, especially with a higher megapixel. If you can fly higher, it's going to be a little more efficient. But there becomes a time where a fixed wing that's more efficient or a VTOL drone might be required. And then also, I think it's real important to make sure that you understand the accuracy requirements for a project before you decide what to use. For an example, like obviously there's limitations from photogrammetry to LiDAR. Common one is heavy vegetated areas. If you're expected to get a good topo of land and it's heavy vegetated, obviously you're going to want to use LiDAR. And yeah, and then obviously a lot of construction companies, like Chris said, Weber, trying to navigate what hardware is best for them to go away from DJI to different hardware. So I think, doing testing is great. And like Chris said, it's a big undertaking having to write your procedures all over again. I do got one question for Chris. Chris, roughly how many pilots or drones does Weber have in their program?
Um, Before December 22nd,
Yeah, before the band.
we had 10 aircraft and 10 pilots in the field.
Awesome.
We are currently reduced down to 4 aircraft on non-federally funded projects, and the other pilots are waiting.
Got it.
You
So
know,
your goal is to scale back up to where you were once you're done doing all the testing on new hardware.
right, right, yeah. I mean, we have to make sure that we get the right hammer for the
Yeah.
for the nails. So,
Yeah.
and trying to find one aircraft to fit all of the situations that we have um,
Yep.
is also part of the struggle. So,
Well, and it's a bigger financial hit too, when you're going from five to $10,000 for a DJI up to 60 plus, 50 to 90 grand, depending on how many extra batteries or whatever package you get, and sensor. It's a big investment.
it is.
Yeah.
A lot of these platforms are untested in some of the environments that we're actually functioning in.
Definitely.
Yeah. So testing is definitely a critical step to making sure you've got the right equipment for the job. Absolutely. For the group, we have a couple blog posts that might be helpful. Feel free to check them out on our website. There's one just helping to, distill down what the federal regulations mean, and then there's another one as well that Chaz has created for us around some NDAA approved hardware and drone options as well. So feel free to take a look at our blog. We'll have a lot of content there. And then Dallas and I are also available for any guidance. Thank you, Dallas and Chris. That was super helpful in terms of talking about equipment. So once you have the right equipment in place, the next piece is making sure the people using it are set up for success. We touched on this just a little bit in terms of, what's next for Weber as they secure NDA approved drones, for example. But Chris, higher level, we've talked quite a bit through our partnership about how you train your pilots. And I'd love to hear what you've seen make the biggest difference when it comes to getting pilots to a point where the data is usable and consistent. Would you mind, just sharing more with the group about how you and Weber go about it?
Yeah. So as a 30-year surveyor, the drones are tools, and our ultimate goal is to capture survey data. So we start there with training our surveyors and instrument operators to get their 107 cert. Um, we actually, there's a lot of online training platforms. We use one that's drone pilot ground school, and we have a lot of success, probably a 95% pass rate. Um, yeah, that's
Awesome.
hurdle.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. I've heard a lot about Drone Pilot Ground School. I hear it's a good course. Dallas, what's your perspective on the sort of the biggest item for ensuring pilots are ready to capture reliable data?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it a lot where, especially people that are new to drone programs, they send someone to get their Part 107, they think they're just ready to go. Um, the Part 107 is great, but there's no practical flight training. There's nothing in there about, how to collect good data for mapping. So I think it goes beyond just the Part 107. Practical flight training, I think, is a must. I think pilots should learn how to fly manually, not just how to fly an automated mapping mission. So practical flight training is important. Mapping specific training is important. And I think it's also important that they understand like the why, not just, hey, fly at this altitude, fly with this overlap. I think they should understand, why it's required. What is GSD, what is ground sampling distance and why it's important. So I think like the fundamentals of photogrammetry is really important as well. And I think just ongoing, just updated and keeping up on what's new, right? Whether it's regulations, new hardware, new software, and the technology is always changing. So I think just keeping up on the technology and what's going on in the industry is really important. Yeah, and then refresh training as well. So I think all of that is important. I see it a lot where it kind of stops at, one and maybe two, where it's just, or I see a lot of companies skip two and go right to three. And the problem with that is if someone has to take over to fly the drone manually, they don't know how to do it, and that's usually when bad things happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, quick question. That's why I was raising my hand. I got a question. If you're a smaller team and you want to get some of that experience, like, the practical flight training and things like that, as you're, any suggestions, like if you're, like let's say you're just a one-man team and, you're interested in getting your 107 and then you want that practical training, any suggestions or tips on how to help that person trying to be the first person getting it started, or if you've got smaller team and someone might be far away and they might want to get that training, but it might not be, the person may not be close enough to help them. Any suggestions on that?
That's a great question. Absolutely,
Yeah.
Chaz. Dallas or Chris, either of you can feel free to answer.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, if there's no one on your team, if you're trying to build a new program and you're starting from scratch, I definitely would spend a lot of time online. And if it's in your budget, there are companies that you can pay to do like in-person training that could train you. But if you're very tech savvy, and everything's online nowadays, you could definitely learn on your own. But I think it's just really important to learn, fail before you try to implement it. Because that's where you don't want to implement something if you're not confident in what you're delivering, because then you start to like undermine trust of what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dallas. Chris, anything to add?
YouTube is awesome.
Yep.
These, these processes have been happening, for as far as 107 is concerned, the last 10 to 12 years. So, there's a lot of information out there. But as I
Absolutely.
say, go get a survey job.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Cool. Before we talk about our last pillar, just one more little poll here for everybody. We've talked about how data is captured, the equipment being used, and how pilots are being trained today. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to one important thing. I'd love to hear from you how much your teams actually trust the drone data they're using, just about where your organizations stand today on this.
Okay, we've got a yes, we've got a yes fully, a couple mostly so far, and a sometimes.
Nice.
Getting a few more responses. I'll give it just another minute or two. Probably another second or two is more realistic, but all right. I think I'm gonna go ahead and lock it in and share with everybody.
Moose place. That's great. Wonderful. This is usually where we see a lot of variation. Trust isn't always there yet across teams, to the sometimes and mostly ones out there. So you guys are in the right spot. That's exactly what this next piece is about. It's how to create consistency and confidence in the data. So this is where a lot of programs, as they scale, either really come together or begin to show gaps. Dallas, why don't you take us through some best practices for data processing in QC?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, before I start here, I think it's real important if you get asked to fly a site that you ask the right questions. What's the deliverable? What's the expectations for accuracy? What is your team looking for? That way, if you can deliver, what they're asking for. I think the top one, standardized coordinate system is a huge one. If you're flying in one state plane and the plans are in like a local coordinate system or ground versus grid, things just won't align. So I think it's really important to understand what's the project coordinate system, and that way you can tie your drone data into it. Accuracy checks. So I think it's real important to obviously have GCPs and document, the accuracy of the project, and make sure you share that with the team when you deliver whatever the deliverable is. And then obviously you want to do some quality control check. It's real important that after the data is processed, that you make sure that it's accurate. You don't just hand it off and make assumptions. And I also think it's great to have a second set of eyes. Like for an example, if Chris is flying and collecting data and it's getting submitted for like a bid, I think it's great to have a second set of eyes on the data just to make sure everything aligns. And then also, I think it's real important to understand like file types and file formats and, what is needed for your team internally. Depending if you're using like a TBC, Trimble Business Center, or Civil 3D, there are a few little nuanced file types that people like to work with.
Absolutely. I also think it's what I've seen too is about just what is the deliverable? Is it a surface export? Is it the actual 3D model, inside of a platform? I think making sure, to your point, Dallas, to ask those questions in the beginning is really important. So definitely a good suggestion. Chris, do you have anything to add on just how you guys go about ensuring your QC, ensuring your data and your outputs are matching expectations?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest thing is ground control. Without adequate ground control and consistent ground control, then if you don't have it, you start losing data and quality. So we push for heavy ground control, and we get good results. The deliverable, stretches through all departments. Also, is like project team love the ortho, so and the engineers like the 3D data. So we always push for that 3D survey grade data for everything.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. All right. And talking about best practices to make sure your teams trust the data, there's also some common mistakes that we thought we'd talk about today that could happen as you take your team from one pilot to several. Dallas, what are the most common mistakes you see whenever teams try to scale?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of these hit home with me because I've made all three of these mistakes in my previous life when trying to scale a different drone program. So not having standard operating procedures is definitely number one. It's great if you're doing it yourself, you can go out there and you can repeat it. But you'll be surprised sometimes you do forget if it's been a while. So write down, document it, review it, and have it be a living document is really important. that way it can be repeatable. And as you start to add new team members, you're all working, off the same piece of paper. Yeah, we talked about coordinate systems. I think that's real important to document it like on a per project basis. Don't just have that geoid or state plane coordinate system in your head. Make sure that it's documented somewhere. And number three is a real important one, I think. I think a lot of pilots are used to just having, all the data on their personal laptop or computer or on the SD card still in the drone. And if you go on vacation or if something happens, and that data is needed, it's great if it's all stored where everyone can access it. And then also, like, what does your archiving look like? Is it after a year? Is it after 2 years? I'm a big advocate on never deleting any data, just archiving it, because you never know.
Absolutely. Chris, have you seen any of these things happen through your experiences, piloting for so long, or do you have any other ones that are common mistakes you see happen whenever you're trying to scale a drone program?
Yeah, I mean, standardizing is important. Just like in your flight planning, um, you want consistency, and even across states. Working between Texas and Florida and different areas that have different rules. Um, we use one set of rules and we apply them throughout all of our operations. Um, Data is always one of the big ones. You know, you drive around with terabytes of hard drives. You know,
Yep.
um, but as a large company, we're able to allot server space for storing data. And as survey data, we're required to store certain stuff for a period of time. So having hard backups is nice, especially when there's failures. You can always pull the imagery and reprocess.
Yep. Yep. I'll add to that a little bit on the data side is um I think it's real important that the naming convention is all the same. I've had it in companies where, especially if you have 10 pilots, where one pilot is naming, their flight images something, another one's doing another format. Um, but if they're all stored on the same company server, it's really hard to find things when things aren't, the naming convention isn't standardized. So I think naming convention of the images, the data, is really good to have standard as well. Um, and not only that, but like project name, like in Datumate, it's a cloud system, obviously. So your project name should be all standard, not just whatever that pilot can think of in the moment when he's trying to name it.
Points. Thank you both. So when those challenges don't present themselves or they're addressed through scaling, this is what it starts to look like. Dallas, what stands out when a program reaches this mature level?
Yeah, I think any project can be flown by any trained pilot. For an example, like for Chris's team, he should be able to go fly a project, but he should be able to call someone else if he's out sick and they know it and they could fly it exactly the same way that Chris would do it. So, standard pilot, training and procedures. Yeah, data is consistent across all teams. All of a sudden your engineering teams and your PM teams and your survey teams start to really trust the data. And then what you're going to see is then all of a sudden your teams are starting to actually collaborate and use the data. There's good conversations happening between like the drone team and the project management teams. And then you start to see like your executive teams, your leadership teams really start to see the ROI in your drone program, and they'll continue to invest in it.
Chris, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the data that's being collected, the trust does take time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But once it's seen, then is the ROI really comes back to time, right? We're doing topos with photogrammetry and LiDAR, which saves survey man hours a lot of time. So it's very important, moving forward to save that time and put it somewhere else.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
And then
Well,
introducing the
please.
into the survey teams as a piece of equipment for us, allows for projects to have their drone and their pilot and their surveyor all in one, um, with survey in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like, the goal really is just general consistency, trust, and obviously scalability across teams. Thank you both. Those are really good pieces of information, certain watch outs, certain highlights, things that the group can also keep in mind as they are maturing their programs. So bringing everything together, scaling a drone program isn't just about adding more drones or more pilots. It's also about building an actual system that produces reliable and consistent data every time. The teams that are successful here are the ones that invest early in the structure and standardization and training and QC. And the four pillars that we walked through today apply, whether you've got one pilot or 100. It's just about where you are in the process. And I'm glad to see such diversity across our group today. This is exactly what DataBIM is also designed to support, scalable data capture with reliable QC validation and reporting for every job. Dallas and Chris, any final recommendations or insights for the group before we move to Q&A? Hear from them a little bit.
The only thing that I'll mention again is nowadays online resources are great. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to fail. Yeah, and do your research. And there's tons of people out there like myself, and I'm sure Chris, that are willing to help you guys out and give you advice if you're starting from scratch.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dallas. Chris, anything else?
Um, Take it slow and be safe. About speed, it's about doing these things safely in all environments. um Mines are different than highways, so
Yeah.
and everything in between, so it's a big consideration.
I love that recommendation. Yeah, taking your time to really think intentionally about how your whole structure should be built, how all of your processes should be built. Making sure you have good responsibilities delineated from one person to another. That's the way to create any sort of scalable initiative or scalable team. So really good call out, Chris. Thank you. All right. We'll open it up for Q&A now. Feel free to drop any questions in the Zoom Q&A panel. We'll take a few minutes to run through them together.
I have a question for you, Chelsea and Chris and Dallas. What excites you about the next few years in drone surveying and drone technology and just, construction technology in general?
Um, yeah, I'll go first. I think I'm real excited about some of the beyond visual line of sight, like drone in a box operations that I think we're going to see, come forward in the next probably 3 years or so. I think regulations are slow, like they've always been in this industry, to catch up with the technology. But I think as soon as that happens, I think some of the drone in the box concepts, setting up on a large job site and walking away, just have it do a regular cadence flight, is kind of what I'm pretty excited about.
Definitely. Chris, what about you?
um I agree that the drone in the boxes are would be nice to see on some sites. um the regulation side is the struggle, so to be optimistic on that is hard, but you know, companies will grow and regulations change. So
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I don't think you're going to see them on highway projects that are very active and a lot going on. I think you're going to see them on mining sites first. I think you're going to see them on maybe like closed commercial projects like a data center where there's no risk to the public and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm personally excited about seeing hearing and seeing some of the opportunities to make data processing more simple after the data capture. We've talked to a lot of our customers about, some different technology or ideas or thoughts that they have around how to make the process quicker between capturing the data from the drone and generating a model inside of DataBIM. So hearing and seeing some of the options that can be leveraged with AI, for example, is going to be a really interesting and hopefully time saving and lift saving for a lot of people who have to process that data after they capture it. So that's personally what I'm excited about seeing from a system standpoint. It's a great question.
Well, it seems like as far as questions go, we don't really have any more. So if there's anything else as far as final thoughts go for Chris and Dallas and you, Chelsea, like I think then we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Wonderful. Well, for the group, I hope everyone found this to be valuable today. I know Chaz will follow up with the recording and some other things that we mentioned today that might help around the regulations, et cetera. But really appreciate your time today, folks. Dallas, Chris, any final thoughts from you?
Nope. Just other than thank you for everyone for attending.
Awesome. Chris, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us. Your insight was really helpful as we talked through, all of the different important things for scaling. So thanks for joining us today.
thanks for having me, and I'm always open if anybody has questions later.
Awesome. Appreciate you for that. All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for your time. We'll give you a few minutes back in your day and hope everyone has a good rest of your week. We'll be here if you need anything from us.
Thanks, Chelsea.
All right. Thanks.
All right, all of our attendees are gone. Let me go ahead
I left
and
and realized maybe we wanted to chat. Then